Last week I talked about Hogwarts and what I would change about it as a school if I were the one who had made all the decisions about what went into the Harry Potter books, which obviously I was not. One thing that I didn't get to in that video, because it's its own other topic that actually requires multiple videos to do it justice, is the house system, the Hogwarts houses. This may be a little bit controversial, or maybe not, I don't know. I don't think that the Hogwarts houses, other than Gryffindor, were particularly well written. And I say that as someone who totally would be in one of those other houses, so I'm probably a little bit biased there. But there are very few well-developed characters from Ravenclaw or Hufflepuff House. There are a couple of exceptions like Cedric Diggory and Luna Lovegood, but for the vast majority of the kids, they're just names who kind of exist in the background. And there are very few grown-ups who we know to be a graduate of those houses. Slytherin obviously has more significant and well-developed characters, but often they're just kind of generic bad guys rather than really embodying the traits of ambition and cunning that Slytherin House is supposed to represent. Now, I kind of like the Hogwarts houses, actually, and I certainly own enough Ravenclaw stuff. I have a video about making myself a Ravenclaw tie in book colors because I didn't like the movie colors. So this isn't going to be a video series about how the Hogwarts houses are terrible and should be, gotten rid of or whatever. But I don't find it to be particularly good world building or character development, and I'm gonna address that in these videos. So in the next 3 videos, I'm going to be breaking down what I have a problem with in the 3 Hogwarts houses that are not Gryffindor, and what I would change about it if it were up to me. Starting today with Hufflepuff, which is the most overlooked house in my opinion. Now, not so much more recently with Newt Scamander from the Fantastic Beasts movies, but I'm talking mainly about the original 7 books here. And in the books, there are no Hufflepuff students that have anywhere near the level of significance that, say, Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley, Luna Lovegood, or Draco Malfoy have. That second tier of student characters after Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the ones who aren't just there for the classroom scenes but actually play a key role in the main plot. There is Cedric Diggory, but really he only plays an important role in Book 4. So aside from being a martyr around whose name some of the students feel compelled to rally, he's not really that important to the final 3 books, which are where the plot really gets going. As far as someone who's only read the books would know, there were no Hufflepuffs in the Order of the Phoenix either. Now, don't get me wrong, there were. Tonks was a Hufflepuff, but that information was revealed online, not in the books. Her Hogwarts house is actually never stated in the books. Aside from just not really having any significant characters, Hufflepuff House is actually described in pretty negative terms in the first 2 books of the series. The way that it's first introduced, now granted, Malfoy, Hagrid, Ron, and Hermione are not really reliable sources of information. They're all biased in their own ways. But the fact that we don't hear anything positive about Hufflepuff going up to the initial sorting ceremony in Book 1, the only thing positive that we hear about it is that it's better than Slytherin. Whereas Gryffindor is described as by far the best, and Ravenclaw is described as not too bad. Harry's Hufflepuff classmates don't really do anything of significance in Book 1, and then in Book 2, they're the first to jump on the bandwagon of Harry being the heir of Slytherin. Later in the series, once Cedric is introduced, and once Hufflepuff students start joining Dumbledore's army, then a more positive interpretation of Hufflepuff House comes about. But it never really recovers from how it's portrayed in those first 2 books. They continue to be kind of overlooked throughout the series. Like it's mentioned in Goblet of Fire, for instance, that one of the reasons why the Hufflepuff kids feel so strongly about needing to support Cedric Diggory is because their house doesn't usually get much glory, and he's bringing it to them, first with his success in Quidditch, and now with his status as a Triwizard Champion. But that never really gets explored that much after Book 4, while it continues to be the case. So ultimately that doesn't really work for me either. And then finally, Harry's Hufflepuff classmates seem very prone to groupthink. It's like they all share a hive mind, and whatever one person thinks, they all do, which isn't ever pointed out or explored as a thing, like a problem or whatever, but does seem to come up with surprising frequency. And I don't know, I just don't buy a group that makes up a quarter of the student body having, no dissenting opinions among them when they all decide that Harry's an attention-seeking idiot who put his name in the Goblet of Fire, or that he's the heir of Slytherin and he's petrifying everybody. If that is the case, it's a problem, but if it's a problem, it's never really addressed. So, with all of that being said, little ways that I would try to change those things. And I've actually gone and identified passages from the books where I would put a different twist on things. The first one is in book 1, when Hagrid is telling Harry about Hufflepuff and Slytherin House. In the book, he says this: "School houses, there's 4. Everyone says Hufflepuff are a lot of duffers, but..." "I bet I'm in Hufflepuff," said Harry gloomily. "Better Hufflepuff than Slytherin," said Hagrid darkly. Aside from Malfoy's, "I think I'd leave, wouldn't you?" which I'm not gonna change that. I mean, he's Draco Malfoy. You're not meant to agree with him. The fact that he doesn't like Hufflepuff is actually a point in its favor, in my opinion. But Hagrid is someone whose opinion the reader is supposed to value, and who Harry himself, respects him and values his opinion. And so I don't think that just him saying, "better Hufflepuff than Slytherin," is really enough to make it clear that no, there's actually not anything wrong with being a Hufflepuff. So instead, I would go with something along these lines. "I bet I'm in Hufflepuff," said Harry gloomily. "Nothing to be ashamed of if you are," said Hagrid. "People don't always know what they're talking about, do they? Anyway, better Hufflepuff than Slytherin." It's just a slight change, but I feel like specifically saying, "It's nothing to be ashamed of if you are, people don't know what they're talking about," would set up for the idea that Hufflepuff House is underestimated, but they're actually very good people. When Harry meets Ron and Hermione on the school train, they end up talking about the Hogwarts houses as well. Hermione says that she hopes she's a Gryffindor because they seem by far the best, but that Ravenclaw wouldn't be too bad. When she's gone, Harry and Ron talk about it a little bit more. Ron says that his brothers are in Gryffindor and his parents were as well, and then he says this: "I don't know what they'll say if I'm not. I don't suppose Ravenclaw would be too bad, but imagine if they put me in Slytherin." Now, arguably, Ravenclaw would probably be the house that Mr. and Mrs. Weasley would be the most pleased with if one of their kids were to be sorted somewhere other than Gryffindor, just because they do seem to very strongly value academic accomplishment, and therefore, the house associated with knowledge, learning, and intelligence would be not too far away from their values. However, Ron probably fits into Ravenclaw less than any of the other houses, so I think it's a little bit odd that he would mention Ravenclaw as his next choice after Gryffindor. It's not really accurate to his personality or the things that he finds important. So instead, I think I would have gone with something more like, "I don't know what they'll say if I'm not. I don't suppose Ravenclaw or Hufflepuff would be too bad, but imagine if they put me in Slytherin." I think that with a more positive take on Hufflepuff House from Hagrid, and with it being equated with Ravenclaw in terms of Ron wouldn't mind not being a Gryffindor as long as he wasn't a Slytherin, I think in that case it would come across as less of an unpleasant option and more of a reasonable choice. Moving on to the second book, I want to tackle the idea that all the Hufflepuffs believed Harry was the heir of Slytherin. Or at least if any of them didn't believe that, they kept quiet about it. Because remember, the tendency toward groupthink, which is not really acknowledged but definitely very much present, was one of the problems that I had. In the scene where Harry overhears some of his Hufflepuff classmates speculating on him being the heir of Slytherin, Ernie Macmillan very much believes that he is, but Hannah Abbott is very hesitant to think so. However, she does react the same way as the others when he shows up and starts talking. She has the same petrified look on her face and everything. I would go a different route with Hannah. I would have her at least quietly express support for Harry and show that she doesn't believe he's the heir of Slytherin. So there's this one paragraph that takes place right before winter break where Harry expresses that he's glad most people are leaving for Christmas because he's sick of being viewed with suspicion. And if the castle empties out of most people other than himself and his friends, then he won't have to deal with that. But Harry was glad that most people were leaving. He was tired of people skirting around him in the corridors as though he was about to sprout fangs or spit poison, tired of all the muttering, pointing, and hissing as he passed. Now, almost immediately after, it's mentioned that the Weasley twins don't see him that way and actually think that the whole thing is ridiculous and make a joke of it. But I think that this would be a good place to include a couple of other characters showing support for Harry or clearly not thinking that he's the heir of Slytherin. But Harry was glad that most people were leaving. Since the most recent attack, the entire school seemed to have made up their minds that he was the heir of Slytherin. He knew that not everyone suspected him. Luna Lovegood, for one, seemed to find the idea more absurd than Araxperts, and Hannah Abbott had quietly passed him a note in her biology telling him that she believed he was innocent. Still, it would be nice to see the castle empty out for the holidays. He was tired of people skirting around him in the corridors, as though he was about to sprout fangs or spit poison, tired of all the muttering, pointing, and hissing as he passed. I'm not going to talk too much right now about why I would bring Luna into the story earlier. That's for the Ravenclaw video, but the part that I wanted to draw attention to here was Hannah. Going from the idea that she was the one most skeptical of Ernie's theory, most willing to believe that Harry was innocent. It would be kind of nice, even if she gave up on saying that outright, if she would show some little gesture of support for Harry, to let him know that he's not everybody's prime suspect. One of the primary themes in Book 3, Prisoner of Azkaban, is injustice. Sirius is framed for murder. Hagrid and his hippogriff are put on trial and the hippogriff sentenced to death because of something that really was very obviously Draco Malfoy's fault. It's starting to become apparent at this point that the Ministry of Magic may be a little bit corrupt, and that Dumbledore can't fix everything, and that innocent people sometimes suffer and are treated unjustly because people like Lucius Malfoy are pulling the strings. Now, one of the values of Hufflepuff House is justice. That's one of the first things that we learn about them, actually. In Book 1, in the Sorting Hat's song, it says, "You might belong in Hufflepuff where they are just and loyal." So I kind of think that with all of this injustice going around in Book 3, Harry's Hufflepuff classmates should have a role to play, or at least an opinion on it. Now, obviously, the thing with Sirius is kind of convoluted already, and bringing more characters into it wouldn't really be a good thing. But the thing with Buckbeak totally could use a couple more people. So I think I would bring a couple of Harry's Hufflepuff classmates into that. Specifically, this passage right here. He, Ron, and Hermione went to the library the next day and returned to the empty common room laden with books that might help prepare a defense for Buckbeak. The three of them sat in front of the roaring fire, slowly turning the pages of dusty volumes about famous cases of marauding beasts, speaking occasionally when they ran across something relevant. Alright, now here's my version. When he, Ron, and Hermione went to the library the next day, they found two of their classmates, Justin Finch Fletchley and Hannah Abbott of Hufflepuff, poring over books and whispering together. "There has to be some kind of precedent," said Justin. "If the animal was provoked." Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged a glance. Then, in a whisper, Hermione asked, "Are you trying to help Hagrid?" Hannah nodded fervently. "We heard about what happened. We're both in care of magical creatures, too. We have it with the Ravenclaws. And it's obvious what Malfoy is doing." "We're trying to find out how things like this are handled," said Justin. "In the wizarding world, I mean." Since they shared a common goal, the five kids quickly decided to work together. They sat around a table in the library, slowly turning the pages of dusty volumes about famous cases of marauding beasts, speaking occasionally when they ran across something relevant. And then after this point, Harry and Ron become distracted from the thing with Buckbeak. They have a lot else on their minds, what with classes and Quidditch and whatnot. And their fight with Hermione certainly doesn't help. But Hermione keeps doing the research and trying to put together a case for Hagrid, and I think that Justin and Hannah should too. This wouldn't need to be a huge plot point, but when Hagrid talks to Harry and Ron and encourages them to make up with Hermione, he talks about what she's been doing, her class schedule being a little bit full, and the fact that she's been helping with Buckbeak, and he could just casually mention that Justin and Hannah have as well. "Still found time to help me with Buckbeak's case, mind. She's found some really good stuff for me. Reckon he'll stand a good chance now. Justin and Hannah have been helping too." That, I think, would make it an even bigger deal that Harry and Ron stopped helping after that first little attempt, if it wasn't just Hermione who continued. And it would also help to develop these two characters into not necessarily super important major characters, but more than just names who show up in the background of Harry's classes. In Book 4, there's the Support Cedric Diggory badges, and I think that this is obvious, but I think it also needs to be said that Malfoy wasn't really trying to support Cedric Diggory. He was trying to use the kids who did support Cedric Diggory to antagonize and alienate Harry. I feel like that should be called out, and somebody should object to being used in that way. So here's what I've got. The original version, Ernie Macmillan and Hannah Abbott were swapping chocolate frog cards at a nearby table, both of them sporting Support Cedric Diggory badges on their cloaks. And my revised version, Ernie Macmillan and Hannah Abbott were drinking butterbeer at a nearby table, arguing in angry whispers over a Support Cedric Diggory badge on the table between them. "Go on, Hannah, just take it," Ernie said. "No, I don't think I will," said Hannah, shaking her head. "But, Ernie, the badges came from Malfoy. Do you really think he cares about Cedric? He's just trying to use us to provoke Harry." And then, if you can't tell, I'm trying to set up Hannah as that character who's kind of on the same level as Ginny and Luna and Neville and Draco. someone who, while still not a part of the main trio, becomes quite important and plays a role in the plot. So after Harry gets rejected by Cho, I would actually have him ask Hannah Abbott to the Yule Ball. Not in like a romantic way or setting up for a future relationship, because nobody ends up getting together with their Yule Ball date anyway, do they? But just as a friend, because she's been friendly to him when other people haven't, and also to put her in the spotlight a little bit more and lay the groundwork for her to have a larger role in Book 5. I think that it would actually be pretty simple to put him in a position where she's the next girl he encounters after Cho rejects him. Something along these lines. This part is from Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Completely forgetting about dinner, he walked slowly back up to Gryffindor Tower, Cho's voice echoing in his ears with every step he took. Cedric. Cedric Diggory. He had been starting to quite like Cedric, prepared to overlook the fact that he had once beaten him at Quidditch, and was handsome and popular and nearly everyone's favorite champion. Now he suddenly realized that Cedric was in fact a useless pretty boy who didn't have enough brains to fill an egg cup. And then this is my addition to it. So lost in thought that he could barely see where he was going, Harry rounded the corner and slammed right into Hannah Abbott. They both went tumbling to the ground, books and parchment spilling out all over the floor. Harry sputtered out an apology. "It's all right," said Hannah. "Here, I think this is yours." As she handed him his copy of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, a sudden idea occurred to Harry. "Thanks, Hannah," he said. "Hey, will you go to the ball with me?" Hannah blushed and giggled. "All right, then." Now, of course, Harry being Harry, he still wouldn't be very interested in dancing at the ball, but I think that Hannah would probably take that a little bit better than Parvati did. In fact, I imagine Hannah being perfectly content to, just sit with Neville and talk about herbology all night or something, which would actually help to foreshadow their future relationship, so I think that that would work. In Book 5, the top of my list for things that I would want done differently is I would specify that Tonks was a Hufflepuff. And there's a place where it would be very natural for that to be included. Right after Ron and Hermione are named Gryffindor prefects, they're all having this party for them, and a lot of the adults, the members of the Order of the Phoenix who are present, are talking about their own time at school and whether they were prefects, and Tonks says this. "I was never a prefect myself," said Tonks brightly from behind Harry as everybody moved toward the table to help themselves to food. Her hair was tomato red and waist-length today. She looked like Ginny's older sister. "My head of house said I lacked certain necessary qualities." "Like what?" said Ginny, who was choosing a baked potato. "Like the ability to behave myself," said Tonks. Okay, so it would be so easy there for her to name who her head of house was. "My head of house, Professor Sprout, said I lacked certain necessary qualities." We know that Professor Sprout is the head of Hufflepuff House, so just dropping her name there would tell us what house Tonks had been in when she was a student. I don't love the song that the Sorting Hat sings in Book 5. I like the idea of it, the idea of we're in danger from external forces, we have to unite within Hogwarts, and being divided against each other is only going to make us weaker and not stronger. And that ultimately does play out with things like Dumbledore's army coming together and whatnot. That's 3 of the 4 houses uniting in the face of an external threat. But I don't really like the way that the song describes Hufflepuff House. I'm sure it probably is accurate that Helga Hufflepuff would take students that no other founder wanted, because that seems like the sort of person that she was and the sort of values that Hufflepuff House is meant to represent. But the way that it's worded in the song, it does kind of imply that Hufflepuff is for the kids that are picked last. Nobody else wants you, so you go there, or you're not good enough for the other houses, so you go there. And I don't think that that's true in the present day. Peter Pettigrew, Gilderoy Lockhart, and Crabbe and Goyle stand out as characters that don't really have the strengths or good qualities of any of the houses, but ended up in the one that matched best with their personal values. I'm not rewriting the song for you, I just don't really like the implication that these are the kids that weren't good enough for one of the other houses. So for the next change on my list, I want to look at the Hufflepuff welcome letter on Pottermore. I don't know if these are still, I say Pottermore because that's when I took the quiz and when I was more active in it. I don't know if wizardingworld.com still does this, but you would get a letter when you took the Sorting Hat quiz that would tell you about the house that you'd just been sorted in, and if it wasn't Gryffindor, it was relatively lengthy and detailed. The Hufflepuff one implied a long-standing rivalry between Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff House that we don't really see any signs of in the books. So as you can see, we've produced more than our fair share of powerful, brilliant, and daring witches and wizards, but just because we don't shout about it, we don't get the credit we deserve. Ravenclaws in particular assume that any outstanding achiever must have come from their house. The person writing the letter then gives an example of a duel that they got into with a Ravenclaw student who was claiming that a graduate of Hufflepuff House was actually a Ravenclaw on the basis of their impressive achievements. I think that absolutely makes sense, particularly in light of the response that Cedric gets when he starts to bring some amount of glory and recognition to Hufflepuff House. I think it makes sense that they would be defensive of the people from their house who go on to achieve great things and would not like for it to be assumed that they couldn't have been a Hufflepuff because of what they achieved. And I do think that it makes sense, too, that Ravenclaws would be the most likely to assume that anyone who achieved anything great in terms of academics or innovations or anything was probably one of them. But we don't see that anywhere in the books, so let's see that. And I have the perfect place to put it. When Hermione has just come up with the enchanted coins that Dumbledore's army uses to communicate, she's showing them to the group, and she gets this question. "How come you're not in Ravenclaw?" he demanded, staring at Hermione with something close to wonder. "With brains like yours." "Well, the Sorting Hat did seriously consider putting me in Ravenclaw during my sorting," said Hermione brightly, "but it decided on Gryffindor in the end. Does that mean we're using the galleons?" I would add this, "but it decided on Gryffindor in the end." Ernie Macmillan snorted and rolled his eyes. "Ravenclaws," he muttered, "always assuming that anyone with half a brain must be one of them." "Anyway," said Hermione quickly, "does that mean we're using the galleons?" And then finally, I said that I was setting Hannah Abbott up for a bigger role in Book 5, and here's where it comes into play. When they go to the Ministry of Magic, she goes with them. I think it would actually be fairly simple to include her in the stage where they're dealing with Umbridge and the Inquisitorial Squad and making their escape. It would just take a few modifications to this passage. There was a commotion outside, and several large Slytherins entered, each gripping Ron, Ginny, Luna, and to Harry's bewilderment, Neville, who was trapped in a stranglehold by Crabbe and looked in imminent danger of suffocation. All 4 of them had been gagged. "Got 'em all," said Warrington, shoving Ron roughly into the room. "That one," he pointed a thick finger at Neville, "tried to stop me taking her." He pointed at Ginny, who was trying to kick the shins of the large Slytherin girl holding her. "So I brought him along, too." It would be very easy to just add Hannah having interfered along with Neville, and therefore been dragged along with the rest of them. In Book 6, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, one thing that I noticed is that there are no Hufflepuffs in the Slug Club. Now, whether that's intentional, as in Slughorn does not ever invite Hufflepuffs, or whether that's because Hufflepuffs don't care for that kind of thing and don't go, I don't know. I think I would go with a combination of the two and have him rarely invite Hufflepuffs, but have one Hufflepuff character be invited and turn down the invitation. And I would pick Ernie Macmillan for that. The reason that I would pick Ernie is because his last name is Macmillan, and for all of Slughorn's claims at not being prejudiced, he does show favoritism towards people from certain old magical families, which the Macmillans are one of. In Chamber of Secrets, Ernie points this out to Harry to make sure that Harry, being supposedly the heir of Slytherin, won't attack him next. And the Macmillan family features on the Sacred 28 list, which is the list of the truly pure-blood families according to, what's his name? Theodore Knott's ancestor. Anyway, just based on Ernie's own personal accomplishments, like being a school prefect, for instance, along with his status as a member of an old and presumably well-respected pure-blood family that doesn't have anything to do with Voldemort or the Death Eaters, it's not unreasonable to think that he might get an invitation. And then for him to turn it down on the grounds of not wanting that kind of unfair favoritism would be a very good demonstration of Hufflepuff dedication to equality and fairness and achieving things through hard work rather than by pulling strings and using unfair advantages. It would also help to make Ernie's character more likable and fleshed out, which would help a lot, even though he's been a member of Dumbledore's army in Book 5, and he'll stay to fight in the Battle of Hogwarts in Book 7, he often seems to have kind of a stuck-up attitude, or at least to be somewhat hostile towards Harry and quick to judge him. So giving him a moment of showing his integrity, I think that would be helpful. Book 7 there's not really that much to do with, given that the main trio are away from Hogwarts for the vast majority of it, and when they come back for the Battle of Hogwarts, the Hufflepuff characters who had been members of Dumbledore's army end up staying and fighting. We also learned that they played an important role in helping Neville, Ginny, and Luna in their resistance against the Carrows, and attention is drawn to several Hufflepuff characters doing important things during the battle. I might give Hannah a little bit of a bigger role, and I might hint at romantic feelings between her and Neville, given that they eventually get married, according to J.K. Rowling. Again, I don't have a specific moment where I would include that, just could be there somewhere. I'm sure there's room for it somewhere. And it seems very odd to have characters that have not really interacted that much get married. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on Hufflepuff House and how I would write it differently. What are your thoughts? Feel free to leave a comment down below, and be sure to check back later for my videos on what I would do differently with Ravenclaw and Slytherin House.